Welcome to Therapeutic Momentum. We take you on an inspiring journey, spanning breakthroughs in science and medicine development. Over the last century, our average life expectancy has increased by more than 20 years. Join us as we go behind the scenes with medical researchers, clinical developers, and other experts working together in the race to tackle life-altering diseases with new treatments and cures.
I'm Karen Akinsanya. I'm a translational scientist working at the intersection between biomedical research and emerging technology. Thanks for tuning in to Therapeutic Momentum. Let's get started. Today's guest, Kate Bingham, is a powerhouse in science strategy and execution. Not only has Kate led the UK's historic vaccines Taskforce with precision and speed, but she's also reshaped life science investing across the United Kingdom, Europe, and the US. With her high-energy style and razor-sharp focus, Kate has built companies, accelerated breakthroughs, and delivered impact at scale. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a visionary leader meets deep scientific conviction, you're about to hear it firsthand. Let's dive in. Right, well, good morning, Kate. It's wonderful to be with you, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Well, thank you for doing this, Karen. I think it's a completely brilliant initiative, and I wish it was around when I was growing up.
Yes, podcasts are a pretty new thing. It's a great way to learn about people, and I'm really fascinated to find out more about your story, where it all began, how you decided to get into investing, which you've been amazingly successful at. Let's hear a little bit about your journey and, some of the tips and tricks of your career.
So I guess it starts when I was about 16 and I was told what A-levels to do at high school. So in the UK, you focus a lot more than you do in the US. And so I ended up doing chemistry, physics, biology as my 3 subjects for A-level. And we had amazing teachers. And so as a result, I then applied to university to do biochemistry because I found the physics a bit difficult, but I could do the other 2. And it was a 4-year course. And by the end of it, I was just rushing to the library every Thursday to go and see what latest new inventions had been developed and was being published, because it was just in the sort of early stages. If you remember, sort of genetic engineering is what we called it.
Yes.
Genentech had just gone public. Insulin had been developed with this genetic engineering. And it was a really exciting time. Every week there was a new disclosure of, a new interleukin or whatever it was. So I found that incredibly fun. And from there, I went into consulting for a bit, but always knew that this whole area of how can you actually understand biology to then develop better medicines was something that I wanted to get into. So my part 2 tutor, you spend full time in a lab in your last year.
Yes.
And he was looking at cystic fibrosis, and it completely baffled me that you could have a single chloride ion channel mutation that drives such a broad disease and with such a broad effect on the body. And that's a single mutation. And therefore, why can't we actually reverse that and do something about it? So that was what got me excited about this whole area of drug discovery. And then I applied to Harvard Business School. And as part of the application, you have to write essays about why HBS is the only place you can ever go to as part of your career. And so I wrote an essay saying how I was a biochemist, I'm really excited about the prospect of developing new drugs as we understood more biology, and wanted to be in heartland of the biotech sector as it was emerging in the late 80s, 89.
Yeah. And
of course, Stanford was one, but I'm not massively disciplined, so that I knew that if the weather was nice, I would go and play outside. So I only applied to Harvard.
I see.
And ended up going there. And then I was trying to get an intern job in the summer. And this was in the days before the internet, which I know lots of your listeners will find bizarre. But anyway, it was in the day before the internet. So you could write letters or you could telephone people. And of course, letters don't get you anywhere. So I worked that out quite quickly and worked out that if you called people first thing in the morning, often they themselves would pick up the phone rather than being screened out by their assistants. So I called various people, and one person picked up the phone, and that was Vicky Sato at Biogen.
Good grief.
Exactly. So I then said, would you give me an intern job? And she said, thank you very much, but no. And then she paused and she said, but my friend Rich Aldrich has just started with a new biotech company called Vertex, and maybe he wants a free pair of hands who can help make tea. So I called Rich and said, Vicky, I called him, and he said, oh, well, if Vicky said so, come on down. So I talked my way into an intern job, which was just fantastic. So Vertex at that point was 30 people. Josh Boger obviously needs no introduction, inspirational and wonderful. And they were at that point focused on drugs against FK506, so looking at more targeted immunosuppressive treatment. My job was completely different because Manuel Navia, who was, again, the brilliant structural X-ray crystallographer in the company, who you will probably know,
right? Yes,
kept coming up with new ideas that weren't related to the company's business plan. So he figured out that if you could cross-link enzyme crystals, you could make them incredibly robust. And so then the question is, well, how could you use them clinically or as tools? And so I was hired to basically do anything Manuel wanted, but make sure that he stayed focused on his day job. So it meant that I spent time with patent agents, writing patents, working with sort of industry experts to try and tease out what applications could you use this discovery.
There's a KOL panel sort of thing.
Yeah. And then I applied for SBIR grants, so that, because obviously it's not the day job of the work that Vertex was doing otherwise. So that was, as it turned out, a fantastic introduction to venture capital, which is you've got some interesting insights, and what do you do with it?
Yes.
And so then I really enjoyed working there, and I've stayed very close to those guys, and I think the founding team that they brought together at Vertex are superb, and they've all gone on to do fantastic things. So then I returned back to the UK because my boyfriend, now husband, was getting to the end of his legal time in America. And I, by chance, just was offered a job in venture capital, and which was called then Schroeder Ventures. Then we stopped paying Schroeder's for the name, and it became SV. So that's how I got into venture capital. So it was a bit chancy because I was actually very happy working at Vertex, and I'd love to have stayed. But when I got to Schroeder Ventures, they said, great, you've got a biochemistry background. Well, we'll create a life sciences team. And so then a couple of years after that, we raised a dedicated fund for life sciences, which included biotech, medical devices, and healthcare services. And in the early 90s, that was pretty unusual to have specialist venture funds just focused on a single sector. So that's how I got in there. And then sort of the rest is history. And I've sort of learned on the job. And I wouldn't recruit me now. The sort of people we recruit are people with much deeper, greater expertise. But it's been a phenomenal journey. And, thank you to the headmistress that suggested I did sciences for A-level.
Right. It's funny, I did the same 3 sciences as well, and a degree in biochemistry. So we've got that in common. So you've had some really fantastic successes. As you think back over the biotechs that you've been involved in, are there any favourite stories that emerge in terms of the founding teams, or how something that perhaps didn't sort of look great at the beginning actually ended up being terrific and quite a breakthrough?
Well, lots of stories. And I'll show you our graffiti wall in the office, where we have got a graffiti art that basically maps all the drugs that we invested in at the very early stage, which are now on the market.
Right.
So that it's just a reminder to everybody as they come into the office, this is what we're all about. Yes, we need to make returns for our investors, but we want to do it with real drugs that are going to make big benefits and big impacts. So I guess the first really important one for me was actually investing in a US company in leukocytes. So that's Tim Springer's company. I think that was his first company. Probably.
Right, yes.
And there was Chris Mirabelli and Gus Lawler. And it was a really cool management team doing great work. And I was involved because they brought in Herman Waldman, who you may remember over here, great immunologist. And they basically wanted to acquire, effectively, what was called then the Therapeutic Antibody Center, which was off strategy for quite a lot of reasons. I mean, first of all, it wasn't a small molecule, where the rest of their work had been small molecule. And he was also focusing on oncology. And again, Luxite was primarily focused in immunology and autoimmune. But anyway, they brought him in because there was a great fit. And that company was a complete roller coaster. So it had been backed by Healthcare Ventures, who were the largest investor, but the sort of money we were raising was teeny. It was like, you do a $50 million round and then a 30 million IPO. And I look back at the investment recommendations, and the company was always sort of running out of money in the next 6 months or 12 months. And they did a lot of great BD deals. So that's what really kept them afloat. And then we just went into that 2000 boom when the markets were really taking off. And suddenly, Luxite was able to raise money, and they were starting to get great data. And then just before Christmas, we had this huge acquisition offer from Millennium. So that was something that was just seeing it from a very early discovery company through to this big takeout was sort of the exemplar of biotech investing. Great team, great science, always a bit shaky, but actually it came good. And then if you look at what Luxite's actually achieved, Entyvio, Velcade, I'll have to come back and remember what that is. So it's done really well. So that was my first sort of see how it's done in the US and on the big stage. I think I had all 3 kids during that experience, or when we were holding the stock. So I do remember sort of going to the States with a baby, had a nanny, so that I could go to the board meetings and do what I needed to do without missing it, because it was much more in person in the 90s than we would do now.
Yes.
So that was probably the big one then. And then here, Kudos was probably a biggie for us. So that was Cancer Research UK, which is a major research charity here in the UK, had been incredibly strategic. And they basically looked through all their experts, KOLs that they were funding, and effectively force ranked them and said, who do we think is going to come up with the most interesting, potentially druggable insights that we could set companies up around? And so they identified Steve Jackson, who was very early in the whole field of DNA damage repair, and said, we think he would be great. Now, there wasn't any assets or IP or anything like that. And so when we were talking to them about setting up the company, our initial, because we would tranche our investments even then. We always do that because it's a way we sort of mitigate the risk of investing in at very early stages. And the initial milestones were, setting up high throughput screens and showing you can screen 10,000 compounds or whatever it was, very, very early.
Yes.
And so that company did really well, again, in its fundamental science. And it was ahead of its game, so that we had the first PARP inhibitor, but they had ATM, ATR, they had a whole bunch in that whole field of DNA repair. And we basically got to the end of the road of how we could finance it. So there was no ability to take the company public here because you had to have clinical data, and the markets weren't really sophisticated or able to manage biotech companies. There was absolutely no prospect of taking it public in the US because they say, well, you take it public in the UK first. We had plenty of licensing offers, but actually licensing your lead assets when you are at that stage is not going to create a lot of value for the shareholders.
Yes.
And so ultimately we ended up accepting an offer from AZ, which was an okay offer. It wasn't a great offer for what, again, it's turned into. And I don't know if you saw yesterday, but AstraZeneca has just hit the first company to hit a $200 billion market cap. They're largely driven by their onc. Now, it's not, I can't say it's all comes from Kudos, but a big chunk of that pipeline did come from Kudos. And, that's been a huge impact on patients. If you look at how ovarian cancer patients and, patients with BRCA mutations, how they are now treated really based on their genetics rather than where the primary tumor happens to be. So that for me, again, was a great success from the company's perspective, but also a real eye-opener, which is, even if the science and the products and the management is great, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be a good investment if you can't get the financing right. And we didn't really get the financing right then. And I'm not sure quite what else we could have done because we were at that stage where it was going to be very difficult to raise more private finance. Now I think the world has changed somewhat.
Well, these are inspiring stories for founders now. If you think back, it's not an easy road, is it? I mean, those two examples you've just given, I didn't even realize leukocyte was behind Entyvio. That's pretty amazing. It's a very effective drug. Yeah. These are all first-in-class
so
projects.
I'm very pleased. We have about 6 first-in-class. And, get another one, which I wasn't involved in the original one, which was iTech with David Geyer. Mm-hmm. So that was our team in the States that led on that investment. But that was the first institutional investment in VEGF inhibitor for back of the eye disease. Nice. So David Geyer, who is beyond brilliant, basically was looking at these VEGF inhibitors for cancer, where you're stopping tumours being vascularized.
Yes.
And basically saying, could you apply that same mechanistic approach to the back of the eye? And we invested, I think, on the back of even rabbit data. And it wasn't, again, it was a tranched investment. The initial investment would have been small. And David went from being a back-of-the-eye physician who had been running clinical trials, but with no formal commercial training, to taking iTech public, hitting $1 billion, doing a big deal with Pfizer, and then getting Macugen to be the first VEGF inhibitor approved for macular degeneration. Now, it was quickly overtaken by Genentech and Regeneron, but actually it opened up that new class of drugs.
Right.
So again, with an investor hat on, it's great to be able to make a fabulous financial return. But actually, by opening up a new class of drugs, you are enabling competitors to come in to then develop different drugs. They may be better, they may be just have different profiles. So then from a physician and a patient perspective, they have a choice of treatments, which is ultimately where we've got to get to.
Indeed. In order to address the issues of, drug pricing and so on, I think that competition is a good thing. Talking about innovation and doing it under sort of pressure, let's turn for the moment now to COVID. You had this incredible role leading the Taskforce in the UK. I think we all woke up early February 2020, just in a panic with what was going on. Tell us about how you became involved in the COVID initiative and some of what happened in terms of, I think Britain was one of the first places in the world.
The first,
where patients started to be vaccinated. So tell us more about that.
Well, it was quite a ride. So on April Fool's Day, on the 1st of April, I got an email from Patrick Vallance, who was the former head of R&D at GSK, asking me to join an advisory group on vaccines. And I was pretty surprised. First of all, I wasn't sure if it was an April Fool's. And second of all, I was pretty surprised because he knows me and knows I don't know anything about vaccines. So all our investments have all been focused on therapeutics. And of course, NOTS is the same, but actually treating healthy people with prophylactic vaccines is a different approach from pure therapeutics where you're treating patients. So I asked Patrick and said, why do you want me to do this? And he said, well, he thinks that this small company innovation could easily be a source of a lot of the potential new vaccines. And so I, recognizing that is my space, could I help? So I said, sure, I'll join an advisory board. And what he had set up was basically a dedicated group. He was at that point chief scientific advisor to the UK government. So full-time role advising the Prime Minister. And the PM at that point was Boris Johnson.
Right.
And so he had recognized that there wasn't the capability within government to think about vaccines. So he set up his own group. But these are a group of generalist civil servants who were basically tasked to think about what vaccine is going to get, how is the UK going to prepare itself and acquire these vaccines and develop them. But because they were generalists, he wanted an advisory group to advise them as to how to do it. So I joined the first 2 of these meetings for 1 hour every other week. And it was stuffed full of the great and the good in the UK who really do know about vaccines. So we had innovators, we had industry, we had regulators, we had everything. But what was quite clear was these guys were spending that hour educating our civil servants instead of getting on and doing all the stuff they should be doing. So after that, I then got a call saying, actually, we're changing tack. We now want a dedicated vaccine task force, but led by people from the industry who actually know what they're doing. So I then get a call saying, would I do it? And of course, I come back with all the reasons why I can't do it. And eventually, overnight, I agreed I would do it. So the following day, I went back with conditions. And my conditions were that I reported to the Prime Minister. So I'm married to an MP, so I was very aware how political things could be. And so if you actually report to the top, it will should cut out a layer of politics. I wanted to be able to recruit my own team. I wanted a ring-fenced budget, so there wasn't a lot of arguments about whose funding did it come out of. And I wanted quick decision-making. And we just raised our last fund, last biotech venture fund. And so I said I would only do it for 6 months because I didn't see how I could go back to my investors and say, by the way, I'm checking out. And I didn't want to do it for longer anyway.
Right.
So I said I'd do it for 6 months. And they agreed to that. So that's how it all started. Then Clive Dix, who I've backed twice as CEO at Convergence and Panamed, called me up and said, Kate, I think you need a deputy and I think I'm the right person. To which I said, Clive, you are my guardian angel. Thank you so much. And Clive and I know each other incredibly well. So Clive basically led on the science. He built his own due diligence team to basically assess what were about 150 potential vaccine candidates. And then we put in place manufacturing, so science, manufacturing, clinical and regulatory, and industry. So those were the people I recruited. And then I was matched up with a civil servant who basically had a career in the army, started off as a bomb disposal expert. So exactly the right.
In this situation, it seems very apt.
Yeah, exactly. No panicking. And then he recruited program management, legal and commercial, diplomacy, because actually we needed somebody that would work with all the other countries. And that was basically our core team. And we worked on Zoom, or Teams actually, 3 times a week, 8 till 10. We had steering committees where we all came together, and we didn't have a lot to talk about at the beginning because we were just getting into it. But we at least put a framework of how we work together, and we had very clear, this is what everybody's responsibilities are. And actually came within 6 weeks, we had the target portfolio of vaccines. So we started I was asked on the 6th of May. By middle of June, we had the target vaccines, and we announced what we were doing. The first announcement was middle of July and then middle of August. So that was basically where was sort of the key part of which vaccines do we want. And then importantly, how can we, the UK, help those vaccine companies to actually get their drugs developed and manufactured? And it wasn't as if they had to be manufactured in the UK, but if we had capability, or if we had fill finish capacity, or whatever we had, if there was things we could do, we put our teams on it. And so that was something that was very unusual for governments, because we were a group of industry people. And in a way, the fact that we weren't, lifers in government was quite helpful, because it meant we would do things that we thought was the right way to do it, rather than, well, this is the way government always does.
Right.
So government normally, does procurement exercises where companies have to
bid. Yes.
And we said, you can't do that. You've got incomplete information. You're just going to have to make the calls. And actually, by and large, it worked out really well. So all 7 of the vaccines that we put into the UK portfolio were all approved. And we had 2 mRNA, 2 adeno, 2 protein, and 1 whole virus-based vaccine. Not all of them were used, but they were all approved. And the 9th of November, which is when BioNTech Pfizer announced that they got approval, and we were vaccinating a month later.
Awesome.
Which was astonishing.
Yes.
And the sort of relief was huge, because before that 9th of November data, we were talking internally about whether or not the regulators would approve a vaccine at 50% efficacy, 40, 30, because the FDA was much clearer. They said they would not approve less than 50%.
Yeah.
We were looking at this data, and you're seeing every day, and you'll have had it in the States as well, you have a tracker of how many people
were dying, yes,
and how many were in intensive care and how many hospitalized. And there was nothing that was available to patients. And everyone running out of ventilators and PPE equipment and all of that. And so we were internally talking about, well, if the vaccines are safe, but they're 30% effective, do you think the regulators would accept that? So that was the level of discussions that we were having, because our view was, if they, even at 30%, that's better than 0.
Saving some lives.
Some lives.
Yes.
And so then when the 95% data came out, it was sort of beyond all our imagination. And of course, we knew that the vaccines were eliciting an immune response. So we knew that they were working like that. We just didn't know if they'd be protective.
Right.
And we knew that SARS, the vaccines that they tried against SARS and MERS had failed. So we just had no idea. mRNA, as you remember, and adeno had not been approved for any indication.
Yes.
So the whole thing was
another great big first, right? In terms
and
of,
it was so exciting. And then seeing the mRNA forms also then gave us confidence that the other formats would work well. And our view was you do actually want a portfolio format because some people won't want mRNA vaccines, so vaccine hesitant. You know, it's obviously incorrect that mRNA integrates into the genome, but people think that. And actually, if you can go back to them and say, well, look, here is a old-style vaccine that, you know, all your kids and you've been vaccinated on, and this is a tried and tested format. Actually, that we felt was going to be an important type of vaccine to have in our portfolio. And also it's important for emerging economies. Because, you know, those cold chains are just simply not suitable.
That's right.
Low and middle income countries.
Yes.
And that was one of the tasks we were given, was not just get vaccines for the UK, but actually make sure vaccines are available to all those who need it, wherever they happen to be in the world. And so I think we picked the right portfolio. It's just ultimately where Europe and the US and everyone is focused is basically it's mRNA or nothing. And I think that's short-sighted. So Novavax, I was in the clinical trial for Novavax. That's a great vaccine. And it's a peptide-based VLP-like vaccine. It elicits a great immune response. And if you think about wanting T-cell response as well as B-cell antibody responses, actually that generates that broader response, which is why, again, I think the adeno vaccines are pretty interesting because you will get a response as part of the viruses, so you get a greater T-cell memory.
Yes.
That's what you want. So anyway, it was a really fun experience, and I finished it in December. I went back to my day job in...
A lot of learnings, right, in terms of, first of all, just dealing with COVID as a sort of global population, how we dealt with it, this incredible experiment, trying something brand new, an mRNA vaccine, also trying to sort of overcome this at breakneck speed. Are there things that we learned from that whole process that we will now take forward with us in terms of crossing the aisles, if you like, between industry and academia and government and industry? Are there things that you can say we've sort of learned and kept and are installing in other initiatives?
So the thing that I was really struck by was how incredibly collaborative our sector is, and whether it was collaborating between countries. So I would speak to Monsef Slaoui every other week, and he obviously is a massive vaccine expert. And he would teach me stuff. So he would basically say, well, the way I'm thinking about this, Kate, is X, Y, Z. And I'd be sitting there busy writing it down because it was incredibly helpful and thoughtful. So I think the country collaboration was really helpful. The industry collaboration was phenomenal. So we had companies that are otherwise competitors manufacturing for each other, working together, providing capability to support each other. And we had not just with the big companies, but with the small companies. So actually here in the UK, the Bioindustry Association, which is our like bio,
yes,
they have a bioprocessing group. They got together in February 2020 because Oxford had called them and said, we're going to need some help scaling up our academic vaccine. And so they sent out a call to all their members and said, look, who can help do this? And over the weekend, they put together a skeleton supply chain with everybody basically saying, well, I can do this, I can provide this, I can run this or grow this or whatever it may be. And that was in February. So that was months before we even had a vaccine task force or anything. And so the fact that the industry collectively came together to say, well, we're the ones who are going to be asked to do this anyway, so we might as well get ahead of it. We can let the contracts follow after that. So that, again, for me, was a real eye-opener. And that, I think, will absolutely continue. And that, again, is not... That was a UK example, but because we'd got ahead of it on the manufacturing, when Europe was struggling with the scale-up of vaccine manufacturing, irrespective of the political rhetoric, we were sending a team out to the continent to basically go and support the manufacturing teams out there to basically share the learnings that we'd had. So that, for me, is the biggest learning, is we are in a great industry, and actually when people get asked for help, they say yes.
Yeah.
And if you don't ask, you'll never know. But this is not the sort of cutthroat industry that people think. And so for me, this is all about continuing to build those relationships so that you know who to call when you need some help or you need some advice or you want to help somebody else. And, people coming in for jobs or new ideas, and maybe we're not the right people to support them, but there will be other people.
Right.
Is just continue with that collaborative approach, because that is why our sector is so successful.
I agree. And I mean, obviously COVID was a crisis. You're involved in dementia, which is a crisis of a different pace perhaps, but nonetheless an enormous crisis for an aging population. You're also involved in ARIA, the Crick, crossing the aisles again between academia and industry. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about ARIA, the Dementia Fund, and how you see us tackling these huge healthcare challenges together.
Well, dementia, I think, is really interesting because it's probably the biggest public health issue that's got, until recently, no treatments whatsoever. I mean, all you could do is give some not very good drugs to treat the symptoms. So that, I got very excited about, because there's such a clear need. And it's not just for the patients, but their families. It is such a long disease. And so the opportunity to build a venture fund, and we've focused our strategy away from amyloid beta, because I think there's such good work going on in that space. I don't think a little venture fund is going to really move the dial there. But I think we can move the dial exploring other pathways. So in the same way, if we were sitting here 20 years ago or 30 years ago talking about cancer, we were just talking about effectively chemotherapy type drugs where
that's right,
rapidly dividing cells.
Yes.
Where now you don't talk about breast cancer, you talk about HER2 positive or triple negative, or you talk about the underlying causes and drivers of those cancers.
And immunotherapy and
Absolutely.
all of these new inventions, yes.
Exactly. And that's what I was excited about, is how could we take that same sort of roadmap and apply it to dementia? And so we've got a whole bunch of different drugs, I think 13 in the clinic now, that are looking at different pathways, different cell types, with different drug formats. I mean, a whole range of things. Again, most are likely to fail because that is the nature of our sector. But the more that we can really learn about how do you stratify patients, understand what is driving their disease in what would be highly complex, multi-faceted approaches, is something I think is really cool. And again, very close collaboration with academia and clinical trials. And again, over here in the UK, we talked a little bit about it, Our Future Health.
Yes.
They've got about 1.5 million people recruited so far. So that's genetics, so bloods, genetics, electronic health records, and then consent to be pulled back into trials. Well, they've got 20,000 people who are at high risk of dementia, who are already consented, for which you've got the genetics to then pull into clinical trials. So being able to use those sort of big, non-profit resources to accelerate drug development, I think is really cool. And then we need to do better at monitoring and identifying patients, because if you're using scans and ADAS-Cog, that is too expensive and takes too long. So trying to get digital biomarkers where you can start to quantify behavioral changes, which is actually ultimately what patients present with when they go to the physicians, that's the sort of thing that I think we really need to lean into, so that we can identify the patients early. We don't wait for people to have heart attacks before you start giving them statins and hypertension pills.
Yes.
We identify those at risk and we intervene, and that's where we need to get to in dementia. So that's why I find that exciting. It's a steep road. The team is good. I think the portfolio is interesting. ARIA is the UK it's been inspired by DARPA in the US. So ARIA stands for Advanced Research and Innovation Agency. And it's been set up by statute in the UK. So it has £800 million for its initial commitment, which is there to basically invest in inventions that are going to change our lives in 10 to 20 years' time.
Yes.
So insects looking like robots. So how can you create a robot in an insect's body, for example, to actually do many more things you could do? Plants, how do you actually think about, ultimately food, and can you do synthetic chromosomes, synthetic biology in plants so that you can grow more quickly, you can be resistant, you can be drought? All the different aspects where you can basically accelerate what's going on. We've got examples in the brain. So how can you actually think about a neurotech approach to changing brain activity and behavior? Again, start thinking about young people's psychosis and all the things which are, again, massive mental health burdens on society, where, again, we don't have good enough drugs and other completely new ways of treating it. So it's all a bit sci-fi. DARPA invested in mRNA, they invested in autonomous vehicles. I mean, there was a lot of things that have absolutely changed the way that our world works because of those early insights. And that's what we'll be doing over here. And it's not just UK, so it's wherever the best scientists and brains are, and part it's academia and part it's industry. ARIA is cool. And then finally, the Crick is the largest medical research centre in the UK now, in Europe. It is completely brilliant. No departments, or it's open science. And they basically have just recruited the best scientists from wherever they can find them without any overall strategy. So they're not saying they're going to do anything other than they want to improve human health. And so Paul Nurse, again, needs no introduction. I mean, he's been a visionary leader. They win all sorts of academic prizes and Nobel prizes and all of that. But it's a very interesting strategy because it's also aimed at supporting the next generation of scientific leaders. So the structure is you get 6 years as a PI plus another 6 years. But after that, you go off and you build up your own groups in universities, wherever you want. And so the idea is to support those early career researchers and give them this astonishing toolbox. Because I don't know if you've been around the Crick, but it's
beautiful.
Lower. It's bigger underground than it is above ground, and it's huge above ground. So all those floors below ground is where all the equipment and the tools and expertise is. And it's fantastic. And we've just about to open what Paul calls the loft conversion, which is a sky lab. So 2 more floors of labs in the roof, which Merck will go into for the next few years. And then the plan would be to open that up to innovative new companies so that we can co-locate companies within the Crick itself. So I'm excited. All of these are sort of new strategies, breaking the molds of sort of departmental academia to say, no, we're going to have everything's open. It's all glass. You've got walkways. It's all very interdisciplinary. They've got, engineers and mathematicians and even a philosopher in the Crick alongside, hardcore dementia scientists or whatever it may be. So it's a great institute.
Yes, and I do think this interdisciplinary, I obviously being at Schrödinger now, shoulder to shoulder with machine learning people, physicists, it does feel as if this interdisciplinary sort of approach to science in general, but typically, I think healthcare has been for people in pharmacology and medicine, but now all of a sudden we're working, again, shoulder to shoulder with lots of different disciplines. So I do think that this is going to be a huge part of how the human race solves the unsolved in the future.
I agree. And I think also tackling the enormous data sets.
Yes.
So, now, scientists have to be dealing with these huge data sets, whether it's basic science or clinical. And being able to interrogate, analyze, and draw out patterns is going to be completely critical. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the whole computing race actually pans out, because clearly the private sector is leagues ahead of governments and public sectors, bodies, in terms of compute. So that's going to be another interesting thing for young budding entrepreneurs to really get their heads around, is to how do you tackle the computing opportunities with these big bodies of data.
Do you have any predictions for the next 50 or so years, having seen so much innovation in your career? Are there things that you're sort of looking forward to us solving that you have some insight into at this point?
We saw a interesting company last week looking at microglia replacement in the brain. So if you think these are the cells that are the core immune responses in the brain, well, we've got all sorts of great cell therapy approaches for initially oncology now in severe immunology.
Yes.
And actually, that idea of replacement and regeneration, I think, is something that will be solved in the next 50 years. It's still complex and it will take a lot of bumps, a lot of money to get there. But I think the big ethical questions probably in 50 years is, ultimately, how old should we all grow? Because if you can actually replace lots of failing microglia or whatever, and with gene therapy, cell therapy, in vivo CRISPR. I mean, there's a lot we can do. So then the question is, what is our useful lives and how long should we all be living for? Because if you can actually continue replacing parts of your body and renewing, where does that all end up? So we will need the ethicists and the philosophers.
Yeah,
thinking to work with the scientists to figure all that out. But for now, I think we should just focus on how do we tackle the major disease burdens that are affecting our society. And here in the UK, we've got basically a sick population. So it's been the sickest it's ever been. We've got more people off work than's ever been. We've got waiting lists that are in the millions. And actually just getting people back to work in a productive, functional way is something we really need to tackle. And mental health is going to be a big part of that.
Yes.
That is an area that we are spending as an investor time on, because again, we just don't have good drugs for it. And unlike in cancer or autoimmune disease, where you have a very clear first line, second line, third line, and you've got a roadmap of how you treat patients with different diseases, in mental health, it doesn't really seem to be the same case. It's a sort of, here's a gamish of drugs and it's like, you choose which one and you try on your patient for a bit. And if that doesn't work, you try something else. And I just think we need to really professionalize the treatment and diagnosis of mental health.
Yes, agreed. In fact, the brain is a frontier in of itself, whether it's dementia or mental health. So I do just want to, I could talk to you for hours, but I think perhaps I can just pick up on something that you said. You're obviously an incredible leader. You've had tremendous success, but you're also a woman. And you talked about traveling the world with your children as you were investing in companies. If we have young females who are coming up in their career listening to this, any tips and tricks? I mean, I used to do the same thing, take my daughter to R&D days when she was just a baby, flying from California to Denmark, and it is definitely doable. I think you've proved that. Any tips and advice for young females coming up through the industry?
I mean, the main tip is, first of all, do what you really want to do. So don't be put off by people saying, no, you can't do that because, you're not good enough for anything. What did I know about vaccines? Sweet nothing. And eventually I was persuaded to take that job, and I'm delighted I did. So say yes is the first thing, and do something that when you wake up in the morning, it's something you're really proud of, because we're in this world for a long time and you've got to really want to do the job you're doing. And I think, again, in our sector, doesn't matter whether you're manufacturing, whether you're on the patient access side or the discovery at the bench, there's such a range of things you can do. And so for women in particular is explore those different roles to see what it is that really gets you excited, and work hard, because there will be pressure and it is difficult, especially if you're trying to have kids while you're working and you're knackered all the time. But you're going to have to really put in the hours. But if you find something you like, do it, put the hours in, and make sure you become an expert in what you're doing so people come in and rely on you. Because I find with my management teams, actually, being a woman is an advantage, because I'm not a testosteronal man who's going to have a fight with them every time something goes wrong. And we will understand, of course, if things go wrong, and we'll try and, I think women are good problem solvers. And so there's lots of benefits, but don't get put off by people saying, and also, I think women are worse at being, imposter syndromes.
Yeah.
And the classic got 10 attributes for the job. And a man will look and has 2 out of 10 and says, great, I'm perfectly suited. And their girl will say, well, I'm missing 8.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a sense of push yourself forward, but just make sure you're good. So work hard, make sure you're on it, and try different things until you find things that you really like.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think you are a tremendous role model for men and women, I would say, in terms of your leadership, your accomplishments, how you think about innovation. And I'm just delighted to have spent an hour with you. So thank you so much.
And next time, Karen, I'll interview you, because I would love to send questions back from you, because you've got so much to share with all of us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And see you soon.
Brilliant.
All right.